Are you looking to expand your aesthetic practice and attract high-quality new patients? Discover the power of digital marketing in growing your practice with a personalized strategy session. Join Ryan Davies, Equa's marketing director, for an exclusive 90-minute meeting. Ryan and his team will invest hours prior to your session, crafting a customized marketing plan tailored specifically for your practice. This invaluable opportunity comes at no cost to you, with no commitments attached. Schedule your meeting with Ryan today by visiting www.businessofesthetics.org/MSM and take the first step towards transforming your practice with the potential of digital marketing.
You're invited to join our exclusive monthly webinar, brought to you by the Business of Aesthetics community. Don't let this chance slip through your fingers. Secure your spot now for a game-changing experience. Explore the details on our homepage at www.businessofesthetics.org and get set to transform your strategies.
You are listening to another episode of the Business of Aesthetic podcast series, brought to you by our gold sponsor, Equa Marketing. If you would like to network and share your experience with our podcast guests and other aesthetic industry professionals, join our Facebook or LinkedIn communities by searching for Business of Aesthetics. Today, I'm thrilled to introduce our passionate host, Dana Zeitler. Dana has over 3 decades of expertise in the dynamic world of aesthetics as the founder and CEO of Deluxe Medspa. Over to you, Dana.
Welcome to another captivating episode of the Business of Aesthetics podcast. My name is Dana Zeitler. I'm a physician assistant and med spa owner in Naples, Florida. Today, I am excited to welcome my friend and laser guru, Loretta Zanetti, nurse practitioner and business owner of Erasable Medspa in Tampa, Florida, and her husband and business partner, Michael. We will be discussing business expansion, moving locations, and all things med spa build-outs. But before we immerse ourselves into the riches of today's episode, I want to take a moment to express our gratitude to our incredible listeners. Your willingness to embrace and share this podcast allows our community to grow and serve others. Your unwavering dedication is the cornerstone of our success, and we can't thank you enough. And so, without delay, I am thrilled to welcome Loretta and Michael. Thank you for taking the time to be here, Loretta.
Thank you for having us. We're very excited to be here.
So Loretta, and thank you, Michael. And so Loretta, besides being a nurse practitioner, you have the experience in the Army and currently hold lieutenant colonel rank. You started Erasable many years ago with tattoo removal services, built it up, and are now a very busy full-service med spa and training center. And most recently, you completed a full build-out of the building from the ground up and moved. So I know you're extremely busy. So please give the listeners a quick journey or a quick history of your journey, including how and why you decided to expand and what led you to where you are today.
Well, thank you for having me here today. The genesis of the business actually started with tattoo removal, as you had mentioned. I did about 18 and a half years in the U.S. Army, part of it active duty time as well as reserve time. It's actually where I met Mike and ended up getting married. And so we can attribute our happiness to the military. But the idea for med spa actually started with trying to remove tattoos for military members or people who were trying to rejoin or people who were trying to join the military, but being prohibited with their tattoos. It kind of grew from there with the laser side of things. We added on laser hair removal, eventually Botox and filler, and it's kind of just grown into this baby of ours that has been nurtured and has really done, we think, very well over the last 10 years.
Well, I love watching your growth because you and I have been sort of side by side with our trajectory, and like you're a couple steps ahead of me. And I know with this build out, I'm also doing a build out or in the beginning of a build out. So you're about at least 6 months ahead, probably. So I can't wait to pick your brain and help the listeners of anybody who's thinking about doing a build out. So tell me kind of why you decided to move, like what led you to deciding now is the time to buy a building. Now is the time to do a build out and expand.
Yeah, so I'm going to let Mike touch on that a little bit, but we have been in business now for 10 years. We started in 2014 and up until now have been paying rent, lease. And it seemed like it would make sense to basically invest in our own building, knowing that now at this point, we're going to survive and thrive. It's a little scary in the beginning, not knowing whether or not your business model is going to do well, but we are fortunate that we have grown year over year over the last 10 years. And so we wanted to be able to invest in something that was going to continue to give us a return instead of like a black hole of just dumping money into it. Mike?
Yeah. So when we first started, we were the proverbial one room with a laser and really just trying to make that work. We outgrew that space in about 3 years and moved. It was about 1,500 square feet, moved to another location, same landlord, same plaza, but a larger space. It was about 2,700 square feet. And, in the beginning, again, wow, how are we going to fill all these rooms? But then before you know it, we had expanded to where we needed more room again. And the layout of that building was just not conducive to a larger operation. It was very elongated. It was not a true square or even a rectangle. It was a very narrow space, but it went very far in the building. And so from a patient flow, from an operational standpoint, where you do trainings, where you would have meetings, it just wasn't ideal for how it was laid out. And that existing building just didn't have the resources for us to expand the way that we would want. And so about 2 years out, we're like, we're going to need more space. This isn't going to work. Let's look at finding our own thing. And as it happened, there was a vacant lot across the street that we were able to secure that previously was going to get developed. And then the developer got a bid to go work on another project and just had to get rid of it. And so it was truly serendipitous that we were able to acquire it and get a spot that, number one, patients wouldn't say, hey, you're moving, it's too far away. I mean, it's literally across the street. So that wasn't going to be a risk. And it would give us oversight as the project would develop so we could monitor it and check in and make sure that things were going well. And we would be able to build it knowing what our needs and wants were. I mean, we had a very long list of things that over the years we had put together where we always said, if we're going to go do this again, or we're going to build something, I really want an outlet here, or I want this room there, or, all those little points that you don't think about on the front end, but then on the back end, you would appreciate. So that was our logic.
Yeah, to build on that, people ask me, how do you know when you're ready to move on to something that's bigger? Well, if you're playing musical chairs with your lasers and your patients, numbing them in one room, waiting for someone to finish, rushing them into the other room, and then quickly turning over, you might be ready for a new space. And so that's when we knew it was time.
So what was the timeline from your, when you found that lot until you broke ground and the design process of, did you hire an architect to help you kind of lay that out? Did you guys do all of that yourselves?
So our timeline is very unique to us. And what I mean by that is I'll tell you everything that we did, but for listeners, understand that your scenario is probably going to be different. So yeah. Like I had mentioned, we acquired this from a developer that had already done some of the permitting to make it a different kind of structure. So it took 2 years, basically, from the moment that we acquired the land to when we were able to move into it. But that isn't necessarily how long it would take everyone, because about the first year of that was us going through a re-permitting process because the property was going to change in terms of how it was laid out. And anytime you deal with the city and the county, it is anything but fast. And there was some demolition that needed to take place. Most of the lot was vacant, but it was actually 2 lots together. And there was an old structure that needed to come down. So that was a different series of permits. From the time that we were able to truly break ground, it was about 11 months. That was the actual timeline of when, okay, now we're going to start building and you're going to see the army of subcontractors come in. For putting together the team, there's going to be a lot of people who will have a seat at the table, and finding the right partners is going to be important. So in no particular order, a general contractor to ideally bring the subs together and have that access and those relationships so that the work can be done. And if things need to be adjusted or amended on the back end, that they can facilitate that. They're going to be sort of the marionette pulling the strings with everyone who's involved on the operational side. Interior designer. So as much as Loretta has an amazing eye and understands aesthetics, that isn't necessarily her background. So having someone who is professionally trained with the experience, ideally a portfolio of previous work, and you can see what that vision is. Now, the important thing is understanding that they have a view of the way things should be. Ideally, you appreciate their look, their style, the way that they see it. If you just don't like it, no matter how good they are, you're going to feel like you're butting heads.
And make sure that their style and taste fits your budget as well, because interior designers do love the best of things, but doesn't always quite match your budget.
Right. I mean, your meetings are going to be contentious because the interior designer is going to want to spend a fortune on something that looks incredible. Your operations guys just want it to be done quickly. And hey, this is the vendor we've always used. These are the people we have available. They're not looking at aesthetics. They're just looking at getting to the next job. Then you're going to have your architects and the engineers that are on the project. They're the ones that are making a deliverable that has to go to the city and the county for permitting approval. So in their mind, they don't want to change anything once it's mapped out, because then we have to go walk it back and it becomes another 30-day period. So they're very particular about keeping to the plans. So you've got all these different voices and they have different goals, even though we're all trying to get the building built. And then if you've got financing involved, the bank is going to want to have a say about the timeline and the distribution, or the draws rather. And not to mention the people who actually have to run the business and figuring out when they're going to make the move, what that's going to look like. You're going to have to shut down your operation for a period of time while you go through that transition, especially if you have very expensive lasers, because you can't just pick them up and wheel them across the street. There's a process that goes into that with recalibrating them and things of that nature. So very much you're going to want a team of people, and be prepared to have some people not get what they want, but that's all part of the deal.
Yep. So when you approach planning and budgeting, it sounds like pretty much all of the plans need to be done really before you even go to permitting. Ideally, like you have to have everything on paper, your dream wish list, you have to have the design, you have to have all the architectural structure, and really ideally your budget too, or at least a ballpark. And so did you guys have that planned way ahead? Did you have to make changes? What did that process look like?
I would say both. One thing that I did forget to mention is that there's a lot of aspects to the building that have to comply with code. So you may not want something, but then the architect's going to come back and say the city's going to mandate that you have this emergency exit sign here, even though you didn't want it in that location. Too bad.
A particular type of sink, the bars for the handicap, if all of that has to be taken into consideration, it's not just the aesthetics or what you like or what you think is pretty, but it's got to be compliant as well.
Right. And that's not something where I would have thought in my mind, like, oh, a fire extinguisher bracket has to go here because this is where the fire marshal wants it. So the value of the engineers and the architects that do this is they know what the city inspectors are going to want to see. And so they will ensure that those aspects are added to the plans, and then you can adjust as you go forward, but that's going to add some cost that maybe you didn't anticipate. Now, from a budgeting standpoint, just know that you're always going to spend more. It's going to take longer and you're going to spend more than whatever it is you think you've worked out on the front end, because there's always these unknowns that are going to happen. It could be a supply chain disruption, and now you have to pay premium shipping to get something in on time. It could be, and we experienced this, the city inspectors come from all different departments. And we had two inspectors that were arguing with each other about how they wanted something done on our property. We were literally pouring concrete to make one guy happy. The other guy comes and says, that's not the right height. Rip the concrete up, put it back down again. The original guy comes back out and says, no, I want it here. I mean, we're caught in the middle. They weren't arguing with us. They were arguing with each other because they have their own agendas. And so you're going to, like, who could have predicted that that was going to happen, right? So absolutely a problem. But when it comes to the budgeting, look at what your current run rate is for the space that you're in. Ideally, your margins are healthy. Look at what your cost is on the lease, and then you can start to back into how much building you can afford, because it's not just what the cost of the building is, but it's how you're going to be able to take depreciation. And one of the things I would highly recommend is a cost segregation study where you can have engineers come in and they look at what you build, and that will allow you to take bonus depreciation on an accelerated rate of individual components. So the lazy way is to say, oh, it's a building. So it's like 37, 38 years, for depreciation, but that's just the whole thing. The reality is there's lots of components of the building that are going to fail and need to be replaced much, much sooner. So the cost seg study allows you to compartmentalize what those costs are and then take that depreciation much, much faster. And so that helps tremendously on the back end from a tax perspective.
Interesting. So looking back, are there any things that you would have handled differently? Would you have done it differently? Are kind of like after all of the craziness and now that you're in your building, are you like, yes, do it to other people? Or are you like, maybe it's if you would have done it differently?
So we have been in the building exactly 2 weeks now. And I would say it's probably like asking a woman after delivering her baby, would you do this again? I love this baby, but it was a lot of pain and a lot of like sweat, blood, and tears that got us to this point. And so, yeah, we're super happy that we're here. I love the building. This is the fun part, I was telling you, where I get to do the little decorations and add the little touches to it. So yes, very, very happy that we did it. Would I do it again? Ask me again in a few years, because the answer right now is no.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I've seen your space on your Instagram. You've shared some reels and it's just so beautiful. I can't wait to come see it in person. And, I'm inspired by the decor and how you really brought your brand into it and made it really Erasable Medspa and your beautiful colors. So it looks like you did an amazing job. So how the build out took, so then from groundbreaking 11 months, and that sounds like the plan. So this has been in the works really for years. I mean, this is not something that you do in 6 months. It's basically, it sounds like it was at least 3 years of planning, I would estimate, or more.
I mean, when you factor in just us having the conversation saying like, we think maybe we should get our own piece of property and do this, and then weighing the options. Do we build from scratch? Do we acquire a space that's existing that we could do an extensive remodel? A lot of those debates are going to happen based on what's available in your market at that time. But yeah, absolutely. 3 years would not be, an unrealistic number for us.
Yeah. Just to give people a ballpark of kind of like, hey, this is what it takes, because it's going to be a year of planning. I mean, even if the building was already there, it's probably at least 6 months of planning, of hiring your contractors, coming up with a plan, and then putting it into fruition is 6 months to a year. So I think, especially building from scratch, that kind of makes sense. What were you about to say, Loretta? I'm sorry.
I was just going to share some of the things that I took into consideration, having been in the old building for about 9 years and then planning for this new space. There were a lot of little things that I was like, man, if I get into the new space and I can design it from the ground up, here are the things that I would want. And they're not typically things that you think about. One thing was that I wanted to make sure that I had light control switches that were also dimmable. For those of you that do lasers, when you've got those metal shields on and then you take it off, the first thing people say is, oh, so bright, So I always hated having to leave the patient's head, walking up, turning down the lights. And so we have made sure to have those dimmable and voice controlled. We did the same thing with our shades so that we could turn the shades up and down through voice control. Mike spent a lot of time putting that together. Our outlets, we made sure, because we're a very laser heavy practice, we put 220s basically in every treatment room, as well as our conference/classroom, so that we could hold training events. And then, Mike was saying before that the previous space that we had was not really conducive to a treatment room. Some of those rooms were kind of L-shaped, which doesn't make sense for an aesthetic treatment room. And so we made sure everything was square, that the sinks were in a reachable configuration from the person who's operating. And then we have 120s and 220s pretty much in every single room. And so that has really made operations a lot easier for us. We put the treatment rooms on the perimeter, and then we put the nurses station right in the middle, and then we had multiple access points to the nurses station. And so whenever you're walking around, you have the ability to go from one side of the building to the other quite quickly, and then you're centrally located. So in the event that you need to go take care of your patient, there's a quick route to that. So those were all the things that we had kind of like put into it. And then as far as the aesthetic design goes, I didn't focus only on the things that I love. I really tried to focus on my patient demographic as well. You know, if you know me, you know that I love bling. I love diamonds. I love shiny things. I love glitter. But because we have our practice skews more towards men than most aesthetic practices do, I had to make sure that it wasn't too fluffy and girly and that everybody would feel comfortable coming here. And so we chose our interior designer, who happened to also be a patient of ours. It just worked out really very well. She's an up and coming interior designer. And when we sat and talked, her aesthetic was perfect for what our practice needed. Not necessarily what I wanted, because I wanted all the glitter and the bling, but her aesthetic was timeless. So she wanted something that would endure throughout the years and speak to everyone. And so that's kind of how we designed it. And I think that we were able to achieve that quite successfully. So that was a nice little partnership that turned out beautifully for us.
Yeah. And I think that that's important to think about that timelessness, because you don't want to have to change it again in a year or 2 years. You know, you want this to be hopefully something that will last 5 to 10 years. And maybe you just add a couple little, flowers, or maybe you could change out the light fixtures just to spruce it up. But you want it to be easy to maintain and stick with your brand for years and years and years, and not something that is going to be outdated in 2 years or 3 years. So I think that that's super smart. Speaking of the lasers, I'm also, we're both kind of laser people. Does that affect the size of the room? I know that my laser rooms, or what I'm planning for laser rooms, I'm making slightly larger because my small rooms get so hot, and thinking about ventilation and things like that. So did you have a different approach with sizing of your rooms and ventilation and those things?
Absolutely. One of the things that I learned about the old space that I was in is you really don't want any windows in your laser room, because it gets hot very quickly, especially being here in Florida. When that sun hits that side and then you have the laser on as well, it's just sweltering hot. So we put all of our laser rooms on the side of the building that doesn't have windows. We've got windows on 3 sides of the building. And then we made those rooms slightly bigger. They're at a minimum 12 by 12. Devices like the Jewel X, they're beasts. They're really big devices, and they do put off a fair amount of heat. And so having that larger space allows us to be able to manage the heat that's put off from the lasers. The one thing that I did not realize, having, a 5,200 square foot space, which is a decent size, is that there's a lot of echo that happens with the larger building. And so we're figuring that out now. And so we're putting in some soundproofing panels, et cetera. So that is another unexpected cost, and not a terrible issue, but something that we didn't think was going to be needed. And so soundproofing is going to be very helpful when you've got very large lasers.
Yeah, those are really great tips. And I love the dimmable lights, because right now I'm the same as you. When I take the patient's goggles off, what I do is I put on like a little baby light, kind of like an esthetician light in the room, and shine that against the wall, because there's no windows. I don't want it to be pitch black. And then I turn the outlet off, and then I come back to the patient and take the goggles off. So what a great tip for the dimmable lights. So I'm going to need that on my project. So my electrical budget definitely just went up for sure. But these are really important things that you need to think through of what is the best thing for your patient. And I love how, you talked about that, of really thinking about how you're going to make the patient experience better in your layout. So many things to consider and think about as far as efficacy and positive patient flow. Now, did you do a check-in and a check-out separately, or is it all together? I'm just curious.
So that's a great question. Right now, our check-in and check-out is in the same place, but it's a very, very large desk. And so I've got 2 people manning it. I think at some point we're probably going to have a checkout desk that's going to be a little bit further away. But we're not quite there yet. Truthfully, with staffing and whatnot and the move and changes, a larger space requires more staff. And I'm trying to be very thoughtful about who I bring on so that it doesn't upset the culture of what we've got. Been very fortunate that I've put together a team that is just stellar. And so I want to make sure that we preserve that. And so, yeah, there's a lot of things that I still have in mind that I want to accomplish and achieve. And we're still not quite there yet, but super happy that we're in the building and functioning and seeing patients again. And so, yeah, it's always going to be a growth process. And I think that if I have any advice to give everyone is to expect to run late, expect to run over budget, and be as flexible as you can be, because there's going to be a lot of changes.
Yeah. I would love to hear about your AV system, because I think on your Instagram that you said, oh, I put in this whole system to record trainings, which, for some of the larger practices to think about having a space for that is really important, and having all that AV set up. What kind of things did you have to think about for setting an AV or video place to do that in the space?
Kristen and I both love teaching and training, and we do that for injectables as well as lasers. And the requests have exponentially grown over the last 2 years. And it's been difficult for us to accommodate because we could only do trainings when we were closed. And so that means that we were working 5-6 days a week. And then on top of that, doing trainings. So we now have a dedicated space, a dedicated classroom/conference room with a treatment chair in it that allows us to continue daily operations as well as holding either private or group trainings. And so Mike is the one who put together our AV equipment. And he's done a combination of different things.
Oh, look at that. He's giving us a tour. I love it.
Yeah. So he put together some fancy AV equipment. And when I say fancy, he actually didn't go out and buy the most expensive stuff. He piecemealed together some items that were very reasonably priced, that may have initially been intended for different things like church service AV equipment, but ended up working out beautifully for us. I actually really pushed him to buy this very expensive system, which he bought, and then it ended up not working well at all. And then he found this other equipment and it turned out really nicely. So I'm going to turn it over to him so he can talk about that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, so what I envisioned for the layout is you've got a classroom portion, and then there is a treatment chair. And just, I don't do it in the trainings, but observing them, everybody wants to kind of crowd around, and there's only so many people you can fit around a treatment chair. So how can we rebroadcast that in a way that is going to make people feel as if they're seeing it, as if they're right there up close? So in that room,
and in some cases, an even better view, because
right,
zoomed in on the face versus, standing maybe 6 feet away because you're trying to not breathe on the patient.
Right. So the layout, we have one giant monitor. It's a 70-inch monitor, but it's a touch screen. And so think of that as like a giant whiteboard. And then that is going to be hooked up to the feed for the camera. The camera can then get broadcast through AirPlay to any of the other TVs and monitors that we have in the building. So you can have multiple people watching from other rooms, but even within the classroom itself. The key for the camera is it's a 30 times optical zoom. So it's not digital, it's optical. And that makes a very big difference in terms of the clarity and just how close you can get to see the pores on the skin and make it to where, you truly can see every detail of an injection or, laser firing, what have you.
That was an absolute requirement for the video equipment, because the first 3 cameras that I bought, I was like, no, you have to see every single pore and every fine line for this to be valuable to the people who are going to be attending the classes.
So
I love it.
Yeah, so I mean, that camera is very important. I think the other thing is wireless microphones. So having a really good wireless mic that's going to allow the instructor and their voice to be heard clearly. Not just, people in the room will be fine, but if you're recording this or if you're doing it as a live stream, that's going to go a long way towards making sure that they understand what's being discussed. So again, there's not a package that you can just go and buy and
Right.
have this work, especially not at an economical price point. Because what you'll find is a lot of this is geared more towards surgery, and the surgical cameras they're fantastic. I mean, they're incredibly expensive, but they're also not ideal for a classroom like this. It's really meant more for people that are there using magnifying glasses to really get in there and look, that it wasn't the right fit. And then the other end of the spectrum is a glorified webcam, and those are not robust enough. So finding this right middle ground was tough, but it's certainly doable. And then the same thing with the microphones, making them be wireless, and then really stringing together all the televisions and the monitors as part of a network, so that the more Ethernet ports you can have in your building, the better, because then you can have as much connectivity as possible. We do have a wireless network and it works really well, but you never really know how good it's going to be based on the construction materials, if there's going to be an area that gets blocked or if it's going to be difficult for the signal to penetrate. So you can always not use an Ethernet port if you don't need it. But if you really wished you had one, that's one of those things you want to make sure that you have built in on the front end while you're doing the build out.
Another fabulous tip that I am just starting to meet with those contractors right now and coming up with how many Ethernet ports. So you've given me so many big, great, wonderful tips. And I hope, the listeners will take some of these. Like, I know I'm going to come back and I'm going to have to take notes and write all this stuff down. So to wrap up, is there any last minute advice that you have for the listeners that you want to share? And I definitely want you guys to share how to find you, how to use you as for resources. I know, Loretta, you've got this fantastic training center and you do these wonderful trainings, and you're so generous with sharing your knowledge, not just with other conferences but also with the Business of Aesthetic podcast. I know you're doing some work for them as well. So, any last minute tips and how to find you guys?
So I think the last minute tip is that when it comes to construction, the squeaky wheel gets the oil. Is that the saying? Did I say it right?
I think so.
Close enough. We know what you mean.
Because what I have found being across the street, I was walking over to the construction site like 3 to 4 times a day. I was super annoying, but I didn't care. I was constantly checking on the progress of the construction. And these guys are working on like 8 different projects. And if you're not constantly pushing to get things done, you're going to get pushed to the back. I think that's one of the big things that I've learned. So you just got to stay on top of it. As far as getting in touch with us, we love to talk to others. We really love this community of aesthetics where we share, because rising tides lift all boats. And so if you do well, I do well. If I do well, someone I'm talking to is also going to do well. We all do well. So in order to get in contact with us, our website is erasablemedspa.com. If you're trying to get in touch with either Mike or myself, it's Loretta at Erasable Medspa, and then Zanetti at Erasable Medspa. And then if you'd like to follow our IG, we've got our business IG, which is at Erasable Medspa. And then my business account is at Aesthetic NP Life. I try to keep, NP related stuff, business related stuff to the Aesthetic NP account. And then for patient facing, that's the Erasable Medspa.
Well, I love it. And I've learned so much from you over the years. And I know, we continuously share with each other. And that's really why I wanted to have you on here. And I wanted to pick your brain, and having Michael here was just an extra special treat, having those insights with the AV. I think you may end up being an advisor for a lot of I'm definitely going to be calling you guys. And when I come up to Tampa in a few weeks, I'm coming by because I want to see the spa.
Absolutely.
So I can't thank you enough for taking the time to be here and, giving the podcast your insights. So thank you very much. And I also want to take a moment to thank our listeners. We appreciate each and every one of you. We cannot do what we do without you. And if you like this podcast, please kindly share it with your friends and on social media. Also, please don't forget to write a review on iTunes or Google Play. Your reviews will help other doctors and practice owners find us. And until we meet again, wishing all of you an amazing week ahead.
Thank you for joining us this week on the Business of Aesthetic podcast series, brought to you by our gold sponsor, Equa Marketing. Would you like to join our growing group of aesthetic industry experts and get featured on the Business of Aesthetics podcast? Or do you know someone who would love to share their strategies for growth in the aesthetic business, providing quality patient care, or their clinical expertise? Head over to www.equamarketing.com www.businessofesthetics.org/podcast show and apply to be featured as a guest on the show. Remember to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Amazon Music, or wherever you listen. If you would like to engage with today's speakers or any of our past speakers, join our Facebook group or LinkedIn group by searching for Business of Aesthetics. Thank you and have a great day.